So this third and last section of the dialogue, where this fourth character, Anytus, shows up, yes, the focus shifts to other areas, and the question becomes, are there any teachers of virtue? And things become very strained, don't they? This new character, Anytus, is really an infamous character. Who he really, he's a real person, an Athenian, a contemporary of Socrates, and the reason I say he's infamous is because he was one of the accusers at Socrates' trial. I mean, it really happened. Where he was, Socrates was accused of corrupting the youth of Athens, of not believing in the gods of the city, etc., and of course eventually executed, convicted of these crimes against the city, against the state, and executed for them. And Anytus was one of the instigators of the charges against Socrates, and certainly Plato knew that, and Plato assumed that his readers would know that, so it's no coincidence that it's Anytus who shows up at the end of the dialogue, and certainly Plato is making some sort of point by inserting him into the dialogue at this point. And what point he's making, again, that's another interpretive decision that each reader of the dialogue has to make for him or herself. But are there any teachers of virtue becomes a question, and these characters, the sophists, who were, again, kind of infamous people in the history of philosophy, who they were really like, or what they were really like, is not entirely clear, but they were people who traveled through Greece and claimed to, some of them at least, to make the young men better through instruction, to make them more virtuous. Some, like Gorgias, the one that's the friend of Meno's, Meno says that Gorgias never claimed to make anybody better. He claimed to teach people how to speak. That is, he was a teacher of rhetoric. So from the Plato point of view, Gorgias might have actually been quite a bit more honest than some of the others. But in any case, when Socrates proposes that the sophists, who actually are professionals, I mean, some of them at least apparently claim to teach virtue, and they get paid for it, the students pay for it, wouldn't that be the person to send a young man like Meno, who's interested in becoming virtuous, to send him to? And Anytus reacts to that in a very negative way, saying that these are bad people, and Socrates, how do you know? You've never met one. But so he asks, though, a very interesting question of Anytus. He asks him on page 25 at 92e, says to Anytus, I did mention those whom I thought to be teachers of it, that is virtue, but you say I am wrong, and perhaps you are right. You tell him, that is, you tell Meno, in your turn, to whom among the Athenians he should go. Tell him the name of anyone you want. That is, the context there is tell Meno to whom he should go, should he want to be instructed in virtue. And Anytus says, why give him the name of one individual? Any Athenian gentleman he may meet, if he is willing to be persuaded, will make him a better man than the sophists would. That is, that from Anytus' point of view, any respectable man could teach virtue. It's not a special knowledge of any sort. It's not something that you have to make a specialized study of, I guess, to know. It's common knowledge what virtue is, and to pass it on is not really that difficult. Socrates then goes on to just destroy that position by bringing up a number of prominent Athenian historical and contemporary figures who were generally recognized to be men of virtue, who failed to pass on their virtue to their own sons. And that was a devastating critique of what Anytus said, that any Athenian gentleman could make Meno more virtuous, make him a better man. If these great Athenian figures, I think he mentions Pericles, and perhaps even Themistocles, probably the two most important historical figures in all of Athenian history, if they fail to make their own sons good, to make their own sons virtuous, then that really throws a lot of doubt on whether virtue can actually be taught. And frankly, that's where the dialogue ends, with the conclusion that virtue cannot be taught, that it's not a form of knowledge. And that maybe that's okay, because maybe knowledge is not the only thing that guides us through life. There's a very interesting passage, pages 29, 30, 31, where the notion of right opinion or correct opinion is brought up. And if one has true opinion, and not knowledge, but true opinion, then perhaps true opinion or right opinion or correct opinion is good enough to guide us through life rather than knowledge. So correct opinion about what virtue is rather than knowledge of what virtue is would be just as good a guide. And then there's a very interesting little discussion about, well, what is the difference between right opinion and knowledge? And this brings us back perhaps to the very heart of the conceptual issues involved in the Meno. If we look on page 30, next to margin or Stephanus number 98, Socrates briefly explains what he considers to be the difference between true opinion or right opinion on the one hand and knowledge on the other. He says, for true opinions, as long as they remain, are a fine thing, and all they do is good, but they are not willing to remain long, and they escape from a man's mind, so that they are not worth much until one ties them down by giving an account of the reason why. By giving an account of the reason why. Doesn't that go back to the beginning of the dialogue? Perhaps Meno, when he began to answer the question, what is virtue, maybe he had true opinions about what virtue was. Maybe his notion of the virtue of a man, the virtue of a woman, and the virtue of a child, maybe they were all correct. But upon examination and asking of the question, well, what is virtue, he was unable to answer. That is, he was unable to give an account of the reason why. That is, the reason why they were virtues. So I think we do go back to the heart of conceptual issues involved in the Meno at the end. And questions are raised. What would a proper rational account of knowledge be? I mean, how do we go from merely having opinion, where we say things about the world, and if they're right, they're right, and if they're wrong, they're wrong, but we don't know why they're right and why they're wrong, to knowledge, where we say something right about the way the world is, and we're able to give a rational account of the reason why they're right. What would such a rational account look like? An account of the reason why? How do you do that? And how do you know if you've done it, whether you've done it successfully? That question does not get answered in the Meno. It gets raised. All sorts of questions get raised. And I would say we're left with some very interesting questions, very few answers, but we are impelled, we are inspired to go back over the dialogue, look for those answers, look perhaps for more questions, to look to enrich the questions that we have.